Vartan Oskanian, diplomat, longtime foreign minister of Armenia, founder of Sիվիլիթաս Foundation, and so much else. Minister.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be back to Los Angeles and meet familiar faces, old friends. But first, I would like to thank the Institute for Armenian Studies for this opportunity. It's good to take stock of what has happened in the past 25 years and see if we can truly claim to have transited during this period of time to a new, more mature phase of development. I will be speaking about foreign policy mostly, but first I will refer to the current situation in the Caucasus, then go back to the early years of Armenia's independence and what followed. Then I will end with some thoughts on where to go from here. The Caucasus is among the world's most divided and incoherent regions. Its constituent republics, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, basically failed to learn from similarly grouped countries like the Benelux countries or the Baltic states, which, despite their historical grievances and political differences, came together and worked together to achieve their common goal of stability, prosperity, and democracy. This kind of a vision was not too far-fetched when the three republics of the Caucasus became independent. After all, when the Russian Empire collapsed during the First World War, these very three republics, albeit by default, ended up in a confederation. Didn't last long. Each of them took their own path of independence, but very shortly, during 2-year time, all three were absorbed in the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, similar ideas of confederation was thrown around, was circulated. One of them being Georgia's President Edward Shevardnadze's idea of common Caucasian home. Of course, none of those ideas ever materialized. What divides these three countries in the Caucasus is not religion, culture, history, tradition. It is the differing visions, prospects, convictions, and aspirations that each one of these countries espouse and pursue. To the extent that political and economic institutions define the nature of a region's international role, the Caucasus is more comparable to countries bordering North Africa than the Baltics or old Europe. Their political systems are unstable. Its economies are more oligarchical than liberal. Territorial disputes are resolved by force. And their foreign policy vectors point totally to different directions. Among the three, however, Georgia is the more democratic. They were able to force government change twice during their period of independence. First was through the Rose Revolution in 2003. The second one was through a ballot box. And this very fact gave the Georgian people the sense of empowerment. For their turn, Armenians, us, attempted to force change of government several times, but none of them succeeded. to this day, there hasn't been a change of government in Armenia through a ballot box. And that's not a good thing. And the most recent attempt was the parliamentary election that we just held a week ago, in which I was a participant. Well, in Azerbaijan, no attempt has ever been made. The government and power has been changed dynastically from a father to son. And the moment he assumed power in 2003, Ilham Aliyev amended the constitution, not immediately, but later on, to basically enable him to be president for life. These contrasting experiences in democracy, institutions, and political processes have led to starkly different and dangerously divisive foreign policy approaches. Georgia, for example, opts for membership in NATO on security matters. Armenia is already a member of Collective Security Treaty Organization, the exact opposite organization, not similar in size and scale, but nevertheless they're on the opposite side. Azerbaijan is neither here nor there. They maintain strong security arrangements with Turkey and Israel while purchasing modern hardware from Russia. On economic matters, Georgia has recently signed the association agreement with the European Union, thus committing to serious and fundamental political and institutional changes to prepare the country to take on the body of European Union laws. Armenia, around the same time, joined Eurasian Union, a Russia-led organization, along with Belarus and Kazakhstan, and formed a custom union. Here again, Azerbaijan is neither here nor there. They avoided both organizations. Then there is Russia. Despite the formal relations of Russia with each of these republics, Russia casts a long shadow over the Caucasus. No matter what these countries do, they always have to be cognizant of Russia factor. Its real or perceived significance eventually and evidently will affect and affects the foreign policy decisions orientations of these three Caucasus republics. Georgia views Russia as its main adversary, despite its own contribution in creating that conflict and that mutual animosity. But the Georgian leaders, in my view, must understand that even a complete integration in European institutions does not compensate for the lack of total absence of relations between Georgia and Russia. If Georgia will have a sustainable development, long-term, they must develop a level of relationship with Russia. For Armenia, Russia is a strategic partner, both by default and choice. But at the same time, Georgia is a geopolitical partner by nature. Russia is an extremely important country for Armenia, but Georgia is not any less. If the land link, the large passage between Georgia and Russia, which is also Armenia's land link to Russia, closes down, and it does regularly, especially during wintertime, Armenia's economy suffers. But when the Armenian-Georgia border closes down, and it happened once in 2008 during Georgia-Russia war, Armenia simply suffocates. And for this very reason, Armenia's main geopolitical challenge is not as much to develop normal relations with all its neighbors, but to try to prevent that its neighbors gang up against Armenia. And here it's extremely critical that Georgia rejects the very lucrative incentives, oil, gas, monetary, economic, that Azerbaijan and Turkey offer to Georgia to join them in isolating Armenia. Azerbaijan views Russia as a partner with whom it can trade and bargain, particularly on the issues of energy between Russia and Europe. But the moment Azerbaijan has signed on certain gas and oil projects with Europe, they lost their margin of maneuverability and their bargaining chip. Here, Aliyev must understand that for Azerbaijan to have a long-term sustainable development, it must not only exclusively rely on their oil, but also play a positive role, a constructive role in bringing an end to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Look, in the Caucasus, the nostalgia for security, predictability, and economic benefits of the Cold War cannot be a guide for a wise policy. But at the same time, a blind belief in Western alternatives, which sometimes is viewed as panacea for the region's political, economic, and security problems, does not offer solution either. If the three Caucasus republics considered seriously as what can be done under the current circumstances, they would come to the conclusion that it's the cooperative efforts that will be beneficial to everyone. But before I continue on this topic of future, let me just flash back to the early days of Armenia's independence. Then, three topics dominated the political and intellectual discourse in Armenia. One was the self-determination of Nagorno-Karabakh. The second one was Armenia's political and economic viability as an existential issue. The third one was Armenia's geopolitical orientation as an issue of belonging. These three topics, of course, are interconnected or intertwined. But among them, the first issue was quickly decided, and there was a broad consensus that the Armenian people in Armenia, in Karabakh, and in diaspora must bear the burden collectively to provide and achieve full self-determination for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. The second topic, Armenia's political and economic viability, was more complex and controversial. Look, there's this sense of vulnerability and insecurity among the Armenian populace because of Armenia's permanent geopolitical predicament and its uneasy and every now and then tragic relations with its neighbors. This has led to the belief that for Armenians to be able to cope with such a dangerous and hostile environment, they must rely on a third force or power as a protector. During early days of independence, the leaders of national movement challenged, questioned the viability, the convenience of this thinking. And they argued if Armenia would establish normal ties with all its neighbors, it will minimize or altogether diminish the danger and the threat to its existence. This dichotomy later on was mutated to the notion that Armenians will never have a peaceful and prosperous life until there is some sort of a conclusion and resolution to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict that will also satisfy the needs of Azerbaijan and Turkey. The third topic was Armenia's geopolitical orientation. Look, Armenia's geographic position at the crossroads of three distinct geographic regions, Europe, Middle East, and Asia, and also its long historical influences of different layers, and also sudden removal, the moment of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the frontiers that defined the Cold War borders, blurred the sense of belonging of the Armenian people. But what introduced clarity then was Armenians' sense of assessment of the emerging political and economic undercurrents and realities. But more importantly, its self-perception, its vision of a future endowed with such principles and values that would be conducive to Armenia's evolution to a modern and viable country. These three topics at that time were extremely timely, important, critical, and Armenian people debated these and took a stand on these issues. In my view, these three topics also pretty much provided a blueprint for Armenia's development in the next 2 decades, and also provided a path for our transition. Now we can look on each of these paths where we are, and depending on your own understanding and assessment, you may make your own judgment as whether we've transited to a new phase, or we're halfway on that path, or whether we're happy with the position that we are in. But I don't think this matters much, as Salpi said. It's semantics. The fact is that on Karabakh issue, we are at a position where Nagorno-Karabakh's right for self-determination has been clearly defined and accepted by the international community. Our challenge today is to take that a step further, from rights recognition to move to a recognition of the fact that Nagorno-Karabakh has been self-determined already for the past 25 years. On the second topic, Armenia's political economic viability, which I call our butter and guns debate, one should not expect a conclusion. This is a difficult topic. Given Armenia's difficult economic situation today, high levels of poverty, and the threat of war hanging over our heads, this very topic was again thrust back into the forefront of our debate during this parliamentary election. But again, one should not expect a conclusion. But there's one element that needs to be introduced into this formulation. And that is the topic that Ajemoglu, whom you will hear a little later, has been advocating in his book and in his speeches. And the question is following. During this period of time, has Armenia was able and willing to create the inclusive political and economic institutions to enable it to put the country on the path of development? Was that the fact, their absence, that caused the situation that we are in? Is it the external threats or the domestic deficiencies that cause or hamper Armenia's development? These are questions that after 25 years, we need to provide honest answer. Look, 25 years is a blip on history's radar, but it's enough time to make us learn from our mistakes and gives us time, gives us sense of direction. And I believe now Armenia is a grown-up, and it is time that we collectively, the government of Armenia, the people in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, and the diaspora, that we match that 25-year age with a commensurate wisdom and maturity so that we can collectively take our country to a level that we like and deserve. Thank you.